Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed we do. Lots of interesting things to bring you this morning, including more results from that exclusive Breaking Points focus group of New Hampshire Republican voters.
Yes.
They get into age limits, they get into Ukraine funding, they get into whether or not they would vote for former President Trump literally from prison. All of these things are very interesting. So we'll show you those, and we'll, of course, give you our thoughts on and reactions to them as well. We also wanted to take a look at a weird phenomenon yesterday on 9/11. You had both the White House praising Saudi Arabia, of all countries. You also had the New York Times publishing some sort of Saudi-backed propaganda in the paper of record, so we'll dig into that as well. And quite a moment from our current president, Joe Biden, about where he was the day after 9/11 that is raising a whole lot of eyebrows about what he says there. We also have some really interesting data about, as you guys know, we've been covering here the fact that there was a huge shift in terms of population, where people were moving to, where they wanted to stay, et cetera, during the pandemic that has persisted post-pandemic. And interesting report about how that is raising some tensions in some of the rural areas that attracted a lot of new folks. So we'll get into that as well. Also, Wall Street Journal had an interesting breakdown of how parents are kind of freaking out about what their kids are watching and how they are not going for the normal Disney movies. They have these, obsessions with different YouTube creators and YouTube shorts that the parents have no idea what's going on. I include myself in that phenomenon, so we will dig into that as well. And this comes right as Disney has also finally struck a deal with Charter Communications, which has a lot of implications for the future of the cable news business. Congressman Ro Khanna is going to be back in studio with us today. We're going to ask him about Ukraine war funding. We're also going to talk to him about a new anti-corruption plan. But before we get to any of that, thank you again to all of the premium subscribers who made this focus group a reality.
Yes, thank you all so much for supporting our work here. And as a reminder, we'll be giving you the full view of the focus group in a couple of days. You'll be able to watch it before anybody else that we put it out, because you guys are the ones who helped pay for it. As we said, we're really excited with the results so far. We've gotten coverage in Semaphore, a write-up of it. We've got quite a bit of reaction as well outside of this. So this has been a big deal, I think, for Breaking Points. It's a validation of a lot of the work that we're trying to do here in order to iterate and actually compete in the areas that we're able to against the mainstream media. You guys are making that possible. BreakingPoints.com if you're able. I'm very proud of our focus group, Krystal, because I think some of the issues and the way that we, our moderator, James, press people, but really getting into the questions about not only the politics, but in some of the policy ones that we're going to be able to get in today, very distinctive from how most people actually conduct these things.
Yeah, it's funny, James being a Brit with that great accent. He actually has a great poker face, number one. Yeah. And number two, since he doesn't have any of the American context cultural signifiers of which side he might be on.
I think it really helps.
I think it actually was very effective, and comes through in some of the responses we were able to get. So let's go ahead and dive into this latest piece. So obviously, with both our top presidential contenders, the current president and the former president, being quite elderly, and with, recent incidents with Mitch McConnell, recent incidents with Dianne Feinstein, Nancy Pelosi announcing at 83 years old she is once again running for re-election. A lot of concern, I think, across both parties and independents and literally everyone about how aged and elderly our elected officials have become. So James asked our focus group participants whether they supported hard and fast age limits for politicians here in Washington. Let's take a listen.
Age limits. Some people have talked about age limits for public office, whether it's in the Senate, whether it's in the presidential race.
It's like kids in the candy store. They make money for themselves. They go in, they don't have much money. They come out, they're millionaires. I don't even know where they get their money from, but they end up becoming millionaires, and they vote themselves raises all the time. Ridiculous. And as far as term limits go, they're the ones that vote for it, where it should be the people who vote for term limits, not them.
And what offices are you thinking about term limit for? Is that where
the main government itself in Congress? It's just ridiculous. Just ridiculous.
Is there anyone in particular you might have in mind there?
All of them. All of them.
I just think career politicians, like you said, they go in, come out millionaires, multi-millionaires.
Just there shouldn't be anybody in there over 50 years, making their way to the top after just being in there for life.
Is that an age thing or a how long people have been around thing?
I think it's how long they've been around. I think that people are just so entrenched in the way that they're doing things, that they've been doing it so long, they can't see other ways of doing it.
I just feel like it becomes routine. Like it's just a routine, it's routine. And I feel like the voices of the people, even though they say that they're listening to the voices of the people, it would be a different world if they truly were listening to the voices of the people.
You got Nancy Pelosi who's going for another 4 more years today. I mean, my goodness. I don't think there should be age limits, but let's look at their cognitive abilities. That's, and of course, that's all becomes a judgmental issue. I realize that, but, it's just because some people who are older have better wisdom because of years of experience. So we don't want to start limiting their age, but if there's maybe some kind of test they could take, but once again, who's going to define what the test limits are?
People need to know their boundaries, and I don't think that we should judge them and say, oh, you're this age, you can't do that, because we don't understand. But I also think that if you look worldwide, as you get older, you do forget things, and you do, that's just a known fact. But I feel like taking on the responsibility of a president or a senator, I do think age is a factor.
Does anyone disagree?
A bit, just because I know some elderly that are sharp as tacks, and then some young people that have no common sense. So I think I would like it to be able to be a case-by-case basis. But they won't always know their limits. Not everybody stops driving when they should stop driving.
I don't think you need age limits because everybody's different at different ages. The question is, why do Senator Feinstein and McConnell keep getting elected when they're not competent? And it's because the entrenched incumbency makes it very, very difficult to get somebody out of there. Because once you have your connections, you have the fundraising, you have years and years and years in there, the Congress does not turn over like it should. You have people in there for 50 years, even when they're not competent, because it's just too hard to beat them.
Who's in support of an age limit on the office of president? Okay.
I don't know. I think past 75, there should be a limit as far as that there goes. Just like voting, you have to be a certain age. But I think if we had term limits, whether they have it upstairs or not, they would be out. And whether it be 4 years or 8 years or 12 years, they'd be gone. And it's good to have fresh new blood in there with fresh new ideas instead of keeping the same people over and over and over. It's a broken record.
Well, I like the idea of being in the 70s. You're past your retirement age, so you can still understand that demographic, and you've been through pretty much all the stages of, going to school, working, raising families, and then retirement and grandkids and all that. So you have a good idea of everybody at their own stage of life. But I'd say mid 70s, 75 or so is good.
I really feel like 80. I don't know. I'm probably the outlier in that age, but I feel like that could work.
Put your hand up if you'd like to see some sort of cognitive test for those who run for office for president. Hands up if so.
Yeah.
Interesting.
How do you judge it? Yeah.
Like I said earlier, how do you judge that? Because some things make a definition of what is cognitive and what isn't. And with this government today, they'll twist it any way they can to get their agenda down what they want to do. And I've seen some people who, think of President Reagan. He was in his lower 80s when he left office, and he was some of his better years, his second term.
Donald Trump too old to be president, or is he still the right age?
I think he's the right age because he's got the ability to do far more than most 30-year-olds can do today. I mean, the guy just goes.
So I don't think that's why I'm not sure age is significant. I think it's more about their capabilities. So I don't think he's too old.
What about Joe Biden? Put your hand up if you think Joe Biden's too old to be president.
I thought that was a very interesting exchange around age limits and cognitive tests and how do you draw the line and who do you draw the line with. What did you take from that, Saagar?
I mean, I think they actually identified a lot of the catch-alls. So we had the black jacket guy, the Trump guy. He actually said 75. I don't know if he knows his chosen candidate is 77, Donald Trump. That's fine.
But that shows the challenge with this. And I actually thought the lady who was she was aware Trump is 77, so he's over a lot of these age limits, but I still think he's up to the job. So I don't know if drawing these hard and fast lines is the right
That's
move.
why it's difficult. It's one of those where, as she correctly identified, there are people who are 89, 90 years old who are very with it, who are very, I wouldn't say capable of the highest function of their, in the highest level of their game, but the idea that they're they have dementia, they're totally gone is not true. But if we just look at risks and all those things, I think it obviously makes them uncomfortable. I also, in terms of term limits, I've never necessarily been a proponent of term limits. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of trade-offs in terms of that. We can have faith in democracy, but then also the one gentleman, the guy who was a DeSantis voter, he was like, look, at the same time, you have incumbency problems. If I had to say that there's a real solve to any of this, it's actually disrupting the incumbency issue
Agreed.
and primary, because
Agreed.
allowing fresh blood into the system really comes from that pipeline that feeds into elected office, rather than once they're there and entrenching, they're set on power. But it's a very thorny one. I think I'm coming around to actually an age limit. And yes, I understand that could be discriminatory against people who are still with it or not, but it's just, we have too high of a tail end risk for somebody who is just far too old, or the risk of you losing it, it's far too high whenever you're that age. And I understand that can be uncomfortable, but we're about to get into it. The American people definitely agree with me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm very sympathetic to the view, but I don't
Yeah.
agree with it, because I think the solution isn't, when you start putting additional limits on, whether it's term limits or age limits or cognitive test limits, you're actually constraining the choices in democracy. What I would like to see is more democracy, more to the point of the guy who said, the real issue here is we got to disrupt the power of incumbency. And, we've talked before about the reason why we've ended up with all of these elderly people staying around in Washington forever and ever. And at its core, it is a failure of democracy. So I'd be much more in favor of things that would, instead of a cognitive test, which they correctly identify.
That one guy's right. We can't do a cognitive
It's very
test.
problematic because who defines who's up to the task? It's impossible to come up with the test that everyone's going to feel comfortable with. Like, yes, this is determining whether they're really up to the job or not. Instead, they need to be required to subject themselves to the job interview portions of the democratic process that allows voters to assess for themselves whether this person is up to the task. And there's a lot of things to weigh here. I mean, on the one hand, you have, do they share my values? On the other hand, you have, are they really up to the job? Do they have the level of vigor that will be required? What are their communication skills, et cetera? And so I continue to think enabling democracy and allowing voters to have more information and be able to evaluate this themselves is probably the best way to go. But Saagar, you're absolutely right that especially given the incidents we've had lately with Joe Biden, Mitch McConnell, Dianne Feinstein, now Nancy Pelosi re-upping for another re-election. Overwhelmingly, Americans are in support at this point of age limits because they're like, listen, these people are not recognizing when it's time to go. So we need to put some sort of hard limit, hard ceiling on this, even if it is kind of clunky. Put this up on the screen from Axios. They found that over 3/4 of Americans think there should be a maximum age limit for elected officials. This is according to a CBS News YouGov survey. They say the concern was bipartisan. 76% of Dems, 79% of Republicans called for maximum age limits for elected officials. They diverged somewhat on where the line should be drawn, but 45% say the max age should be 70, which, would rule out a lot of members of Congress that we have in there right now.
That's
and
like
both
half the Senate.
and both top presidential contenders,
Right.
obviously. Another combined 30% of respondents said either 50 or 60.
Good for them.
Should
I
be the
support that.
maximum age. 50, that's pretty wild,
Yeah.
guys. That's wild. I'm against that one for sure. And only 18% said that 80 should be the max age limit for elected officials. But, it's very interesting to me because I wonder if part of why there was more discomfort in this group, because remember, only 3 of these folks actually raised their hand and said, yes, I support an age limit for President of the United States. And I wonder if more discomfort came out in this group, number one, because they have opportunity to voice nuanced opinions rather than just like a yes or no question like what you would get on a poll. But number two, because this whole thing is about who they support for president, and many of them support Trump or at least open to supporting Trump. And so since they have that in mind, while they're being asked the question, I wonder if that changes the way they respond.
It may, but that's part of why, making it and zooming out, trying to look at it as a bipartisan problem is, in my opinion, the best thing. I mean, here's the thing about age limits. We already have age limits. Whenever you have to be elected to Congress, like you can't be 25 for the House of Representatives, you have to be 30 for the U.S. Senate. So why can't we have an age limit on the top? We're going to restrict the pool whenever it comes to the bottom, which is literally written in the Constitution.
I'd be fine with getting rid of those age limits as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, but it's one of those where I'm like, look, if we can have a lower bound bound age limit, then I think we should have an upper bound. And, looking at this, it's like pretty obvious that the absolute super majority of the American people, vast majority of the American people, when you get to 80%, 80 sounds pretty damn reasonable, especially whenever you peg it to an actuarial table. Whenever you're talking about retirement age for 50 or 60, that's not as crazy as we think. So I actually often look to the commercial airline business where, because risk is so high for them. Guess what? Their mandatory retirement is 67. They say that there is, quote, new risk after that age, that your declining faculties make it so that you can't effectively serve in that position, and you have no choice. You have to retire. And they just raised that from 65 just last year. So if you consider the pilot, his health and his condition, his age is so important because the risk of him being even 5% bad at his job means imminent death for everyone involved. Basically the same thing whenever we're talking about nuclear war or any of these others. Arguably, it could be even more important whenever we're looking at that.
Yeah, but the problem is, if you are dropping age limits as low as 50 and 60 years old, the amount of constraint on democratic choice you're putting on the electorate, I just don't.
I'm not saying I
that
agree with 50,
all.
but I'm like, if you can make a good case, and I think there's a great case for why a pilot shouldn't be flying over 67. This is according to many pilots themselves. Well, then you can make the case too whenever it comes to elected office.
It's not exactly comparable, obviously, but also the big thing here is the core of people having real choice in a democracy. And so if you have a candidate who, these people love Trump, they want to vote for Trump again. And I would be loath to just completely take off the table anyone over 70, anyone over 60, anyone over 50. Sorry, you're not eligible. That is just ruling out such a vast swath of society and really constraining the choices that voters have in front of them. I just can't support that. I think going the other direction of making sure that they're able to adequately evaluate and really feel like they know what they're getting with these candidates, to me, that's a much better choice. Because in my opinion, and I know, look, obviously the American people disagree with me, but even if you have a 90-year-old that, is super sharp and people in that locality love and feel like they've delivered for them and feel like they're continuing to deliver for them and feel like they represent their values, I don't want to take that choice off the table for them.
Yeah, but we do have, we have all kinds of, the 22nd Amendment, which requires only 2 term limits. Obama could have run for a 3rd term. In fact, a lot of polling shows Obama probably would have won a 3rd term. Or Bill Clinton probably would have won a 3rd term. Harry Truman, he probably wouldn't have won a 3rd one. Dwight Eisenhower probably would have won a 3rd term. But we put that in after FDR because, we had to restrict and we wanted to be able to make sure that we never had
but I liked
American
the fact
Caesar.
that FDR was there for so long.
You can, but super majorities of the American people afterwards are like, nah, I don't think so. And that's why 3/4, I think it was state legislatures or whatever, ratified the amendment through the democratic process and changed the Constitution. So I think we can all agree, in some of these cases, we should have some sort of limitations. We agreed, after FDR left office in order to change that. I think it's for the best. I honestly do, because it creates real turnover. And even if I think the FDR 3rd term was a very great term of the presidency, if you were looking at it, he did actually implement some very anti-democratic things when he ran for his 4th term. He only lived 83 days. Nobody knew how sick he was. He basically was coronated because of World War II. I don't know. That's not really right. If everybody looks past it, but we put these limitations in for a reason.
Which is why there should be more transparency and more ability for people to actually evaluate the condition and abilities not only of presidential candidates, but also of House, Senate, and all elected officials. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.